On the afternoon of November 10, 1943, at Germany's primary Luftwaffe aircraft testing facility in Rechlin, Chief Test Pilot Hauptmann Hans-Werner Lerche walked across the tarmac toward a captured Republic P-47 Thunderbolt that had landed in enemy hands just days earlier. The aircraft sat there like a bold challenge to German engineering ideals, grotesquely bulky and ungainly, a flying milk jug as German pilots had mockingly nicknamed it. Lerche had reviewed the intelligence reports. American planes were dismissed as crude, mass-produced machines from a nation better at building refrigerators than fighters. The P-47 seemed the prime example, heavy and unsophisticated, relying on raw power over elegant design. German fighters like the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and Focke-Wulf FW-190 were precision instruments, crafted for individual excellence. But Lerche was about to uncover a truth that would reshape his view of engineering philosophy. The Americans had not built a crude aircraft. They had engineered something far more formidable, a practical one designed not for aces but for armies, not for record-breaking feats but for relentlessly breaking enemies through overwhelming numbers and unyielding operational reliability. In 90 minutes, Lerche would draft a report that might be filed away and overlooked, yet history would validate his insights. Germany was crafting fighters for personal brilliance. America was forging them for industrial warfare. And in total war, that distinction would prove decisive. Hans-Werner Lerche had been flying since his youth. Born in 1914 in Breslau, now Rockwar in Poland, he started with gliders in the early 1930s, rising through determination despite his family's modest means. When Hitler rose to power and Germany began its covert rearmament, opportunities emerged. By 1939, Lerche was a test pilot at Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's counterpart to America's Wright Field or Britain's Farnborough. Unlike combat pilots who mastered one or two types deeply, Lerche flew everything. New German prototypes, production models, captured enemy planes. His logbook would eventually tally over 125 different aircraft types, including Allied captures like the P-51 Mustang, P-38 Lightning, B-17 Flying Fortress, B-26 Marauder, Avro Lancaster, and even the P-80 Shooting Star, America's first jet fighter. He was a trained aeronautical engineer, his reports renowned for unflinching technical candor. If a plane fell short, he stated it plainly. If an enemy design excelled, he detailed it thoroughly. This honesty earned him adversaries among Nazi officials who favored rosy evaluations over hard facts. But his expertise was indispensable. When Hans-Werner Lerche declared a plane good or bad, people paid attention, even if they disliked the verdict. The P-47 Thunderbolt on the Rechlin tarmac had a compelling backstory. Its pilot, Second Lieutenant William E. Roach of the 358th Fighter Squadron, 355th Fighter Group, had become disoriented in foul weather during a bomber escort mission on November 7, 1943. His entire flight ran critically low on fuel due to headwinds and thick clouds. The flight leader landed on a beach. Another pilot bailed out over the North Sea. Only one made it back to England, barely. Roach spotted what he believed was an airfield in southern England. He touched down safely, followed a ground vehicle to parking, and shut down his engine. Only then did the horrifying reality dawn. He was not in England. He was at a Luftwaffe base in Caen, France. German soldiers approached with rifles raised. Roach was now a prisoner of war. His aircraft, nicknamed Beetle with serial number 42-22490, was German property. The Luftwaffe moved swiftly. Allied fighters patrolled the skies, strafing high-value targets. Beetle was ferried inland to Rechlin before American or British aircraft could destroy it. Now it awaited evaluation, repainted in Luftwaffe camouflage with the code T9+FK, the marking of the renowned Wanderzirkus Rosarius demonstration unit. Lerche had overheard the derisive remarks from fellow pilots. The P-47 was a joke, too heavy, too oversized, too American. It embodied all the flaws of American design philosophy, rough, unrefined, using a massive engine to offset poor aerodynamics. But Lerche had learned to distrust initial impressions. He had flown enough captured Allied aircraft to recognize that British and American engineers were highly capable. If they designed a plane this way, there were sound reasons. His task was to uncover those reasons. As he neared Beetle, Lerche noted the sheer scale. The radial engine was immense, the fuselage barrel-like around it. The landing gear was stout and durable. Everything about the aircraft screamed ruggedness. German fighters were sleek and elegant, optimized for agility and peak performance. This one looked engineered by shipbuilders, not aviators. Lerche began his pre-flight walk-around. The build quality stood out immediately. Clean welds, precise panel fits, premium materials throughout. This was not crude fabrication. This was advanced mass production. And there was a vital difference. The plane was built to tolerances that German factories, increasingly strained by wartime demands, were struggling to uphold. Lerche climbed into the cockpit and instantly grasped why German pilots grumbled. The cockpit was vast, enormous compared to the cramped quarters of a Bf-109. A German pilot used to his plane fitting like a tight glove would feel adrift in this expanse. But as Lerche settled into the seat, he realized this was no flaw. It was intentional design. In a Bf-109, Lerche had to hunch to avoid constant head bumps on the canopy. The cockpit was so confined that accessing instruments was awkward, and long missions were physically draining. German engineering prioritized performance. If pilot comfort suffered, that was acceptable. The P-47 cockpit was comfortable, not merely adequate, but genuinely ergonomic. The seat was well padded. There was space to shift, stretch, adjust during extended flight. The canopy was tall and clear, offering superb visibility. Controls were all within easy reach without strain. Lerche examined the instruments and controls. Here was something remarkable. The panel used color coding, red and green zones, marking safe engine operating ranges. A pilot could glance at engine status without reading numbers. He understood why. Intelligence indicated American fighter units included pilots from diverse nations, free French, Polish, even some with limited English. The color coding allowed a pilot unfamiliar with English to operate safely. Green meant go. Red meant danger, universal and intuitive. It was ingenious, not from a pure engineering perspective, but from an operational one, factoring in human elements. Lerche continued his scrutiny. The control layout was logical and organized. Throttle, mixture, and propeller pitch were grouped on the left. Fuel system controls were clearly labeled. Everything was engineered for user-friendliness. German fighters were tailored for expert pilots. The Bf-109 was notoriously tricky on takeoff and landing, its narrow gear prone to ground loops. Mastery required skill. The Luftwaffe tolerated this because their training produced proficient pilots, but Lerche knew that by late 1943, the Luftwaffe's training was crumbling. Fuel shortages meant new pilots got minimal hours before combat. The rigorous programs of 1939 and 1940 no longer existed. Germany needed planes that novices could fly safely, yet they still built for elites. Lerche ran through the pre-flight checklist. The manual was clear and thorough, with step-by-step procedures. German manuals assumed expertise. American ones assumed inexperience, and explained everything meticulously. He started the engine. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp roared to life with its distinctive rumble. Then Lerche noticed a pattern that would recur in his assessment. The engine ran smoothly. Exquisitely smoothly. He had flown enough American aircraft to spot this consistency. American engines were reliably even and dependable. German engines, especially later in the war, grew temperamental. Factory quality varied. Replacement parts often fit poorly. Engines perfect when new developed issues after little use. The R2800 idled like it could run indefinitely. No vibration, no roughness, no worrisome noises, just seamless, potent operation. This was mass production at a level Germany could not match. Crafting one flawless engine in a lab was one thing. Producing thousands of consistently reliable ones was another. Lerche got clearance and taxied to the runway. Here came another revelation. The P-47's landing gear was wide and robust. The tailwheel locked, keeping the aircraft tracking straight. Taxiing was straightforward, visibility good, the plane stable. In a Bf-109, ground handling was a perpetual challenge. Narrow gear, unstable, nose visibility poor. Inexperienced pilots often ground looped during taxi or landing, damaging the aircraft without enemy involvement. The Luftwaffe accepted these traits as the cost of high performance. The P-47 was designed for operations from rough forward airfields by pilots of varying proficiency. The sturdy gear could handle hard landings. The solid ground manners meant fewer accidents. In his memoir, Lerche later recounted forgetting to lock the tailwheel once and nearly ground looping, but catching it in time. The aircraft was forgiving enough to allow recovery, something impossible in a Bf-109. Lerche lined on the runway and advanced the throttle. Acceleration was impressive. The massive engine propelled the heavy fighter forward with authority. The takeoff roll was longer than a German fighter's, but not excessively so. The plane lifted off smoothly, and Lerche retracted the gear. Climbing to altitude, Lerche tested handling qualities. The The P-47 was not agile in the German sense. It did not turn tightly. It lacked the instantaneous response of a Bf-109 or Flash 190. But it was stable, predictable, and solid. Lerche experimented with flaps at safe height. As noted in his memoir, the hydraulic system operated flawlessly. Everything functioned as intended. No quirks, no surprises, no systems demanding delicate management. This was the emerging theme. The P-47 was not the most nimble fighter. It was not the fastest at low altitude. It did not shine in classic dogfights, but it was competent across the board, reliable in every system, and tolerant of pilot errors. German fighters were high-strung thoroughbreds. The P-47 was a workhorse, and Lerche was beginning to grasp that in industrial warfare, workhorses prevail. At altitude, Lerche evaluated performance. Above 15,000 feet, the P-47's turbo supercharger shone. The aircraft accelerated steadily, sustaining power where German fighters labored in thin air. Dive performance was outstanding. Roll rate was excellent for its size. Lerche flew for about 90 minutes, subjecting the Thunderbolt to various maneuvers. The plane never disappointed negatively. Everything performed as it should. The engine never faltered. Controls stayed responsive. Systems remained operational. That was when Lerche comprehended the profound insight. The P-47 was not designed as the ultimate fighter. It was engineered as the ultimate operational fighter. The difference was significant. German engineers designed for peak performance. American engineers designed for sustained operations. A pristine Bf-109 flown by an expert might outperform a P-47 in a dogfight. But how often were German planes pristine? How often were pilots experts? How often could mechanics deliver the exacting maintenance required? The P-47 was built assuming maintenance by mechanics of mixed skill, using parts from varied batches under field conditions, possibly amid enemy fire. It assumed pilots might be fatigued, stressed, injured, or undertrained. It assumed aircraft would sustain battle damage and still fly on. Every design choice made sense once Lerche grasped this philosophy. The robust build, forgiving handling, intuitive controls, dependable engine, all serving operational availability. Lerche returned to Rechlin and landed. The touchdown was uncomplicated. The sturdy gear absorbed it smoothly. He taxied back to the hangar and shut down the engine. Ground crew gathered, eager for his verdict. What did he think of the ungainly American fighter? Lerche climbed out and gazed at the aircraft thoughtfully. Then he said something that surprised them. The P-47 cockpit could baffle even an experienced pilot. But he added, sitting in the Thunderbolt was truly comfortable flying. The mechanics looked puzzled. Best designed? It was huge, heavy, inelegant. How could it be well designed? It is not designed for performance, Lerche explained. It is designed for operations, and there is a difference. That evening, Lerche sat at his desk and began composing his technical report. This was always the most crucial part of his role. Flying the plane was one aspect. Grasping its strategic implications was another. He structured the report into sections: performance, handling, systems, and strategic evaluation. In performance, he documented objectively. The P-47 was fast at altitude, slower, low down. Dive capability was excellent. Turning was adequate but not exceptional. Climb rate was solid. High altitude performance excelled thanks to the turbo supercharger. In handling, he noted stable, predictable traits, easy ground operations, forgiving flight behavior, good visibility, comfortable cockpit for long-duration missions. In systems, he detailed color-coded instruments, intuitive control arrangement, durable construction, smooth, reliable engine. But in the strategic evaluation, Lerche wrote something prophetic. The P-47 Thunderbolt embodies a fundamentally different design philosophy from German fighters. German aircraft are optimized for peak performance and assume expert pilots and maintenance. The P-47 is optimized for operational reliability and assumes average pilots and field maintenance. This aircraft is designed to be operated in large numbers by pilots of varying skill level. The forgiving handling means fewer accidents. The robust construction means more aircraft return from missions. The reliable engine means higher uptime and less maintenance. The intuitive controls mean faster training. Most significantly, every design decision prioritizes sustained operations over peak performance. The Americans have not built the best fighter. They have built the most operational fighter, and they can produce it in numbers we cannot match. Lerche paused, pondering his conclusion. He knew it would be contentious, perhaps risky, but accuracy outweighed comfort. Assessment. The P-47 is not crude engineering. It is sophisticated operational engineering. Germany builds fighters for individual excellence. America builds fighters for industrial war. If the Americans can field hundreds of these aircraft, flown by adequately trained pilots, our numerical and qualitative advantages will be negated through sheer operational availability. Recommendation: German fighter design philosophy must incorporate operational reliability as a primary requirement, not a secondary consideration. We cannot win an attrition war against an enemy that can keep more aircraft operational more consistently. He signed the report and submitted it through channels. Lerche's report ascended the command structure. It was read, debated, and ultimately archived. The conclusions were dismissed as overly pessimistic. The P-47 remained a crude American design. German fighters were superior. End of discussion. But Lerche's forecasts began materializing almost at once. By early 1944, P-47 Thunderbolts swarmed over Germany in vast numbers. They escorted American bomber formations deep into the Reich, and they kept coming day after day, mission after mission. German fighters intercepted and sometimes downed them. But the next day, more P-47s appeared. Always more. Luftwaffe pilots reported frustration. They would damage P-47s that should have been destroyed, only to watch them limp home. They would shoot down American pilots one day and face fresh American pilots in new P-47s the next. The supply seemed endless. Meanwhile, German fighter production faltered. Allied bombing disrupted factories. Material shortages forced compromises. Quality control deteriorated as skilled workers were conscripted and replaced by forced labor. Aircraft that should have been reliable developed faults. Engines failed prematurely. Systems malfunctioned. The operational availability gap widened. The Luftwaffe might have more aircraft on paper, but fewer were airborne on any given day. American units sustained higher readiness rates because their planes were designed for it. Lerche persisted at Rechlin, flying more captures and authoring more reports. He tested a seized P-51 Mustang and admired its blend of range and performance. He flew Spitfires, Hurricanes, Soviet fighters. Each appraisal reinforced his conclusion. Allied aircraft emphasized operational dependability. The P-47 Beetle that Lerche had flown eventually joined the Wanderzirkus Rosarius, a special Luftwaffe demonstration unit led by Flugkapitän Theodor Rosarius. This group toured frontline bases with captured Allied aircraft, showing German pilots what they faced and how to counter it. Ironically, this meant German aviators received detailed briefings on the P-47's strengths and weaknesses, but their own planes were not redesigned to match its operational edges. In early 1944, Beetle was briefly restored to American markings for Nazi propaganda films, then repainted. It served in training until abandoned in Göttingen, Germany, and recaptured by advancing American forces in May 1945 due to mechanical issues during the German retreat. Another German pilot, Walter Wolfram, who flew captured P-47s, offered a contrasting view. "I did not like the Thunderbolt. It was too large. The cockpit was huge and unfamiliar. After many hours in the tight space of the 109, everything was out of reach and distant from the pilot." Though the P-51 was a fine plane to fly with its responsiveness and capabilities, it too was complicated. With all the levers, controls, and switches in the cockpit, I was amazed they found time to fight. We had nothing like this in the 109. Everything was simple and close to the pilot. The war dragged on. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe collapsed. Not because German pilots lacked courage or skill, but because the industrial foundation could not sustain operations. Planes sat grounded for lack of fuel. New pilots received scant training as fuel for practice flights vanished. Spares grew scarce. Everything Lerche had pinpointed as the American advantage, operational sustainability, was absent from the German effort. Hans-Werner Lerche survived the war. His test pilot prowess and cautious flying ensured he never crashed or severely damaged an aircraft throughout his career. An extraordinary record given over 125 types, many captured without manuals or prior familiarity. After Germany's surrender, Lerche was interrogated by Allied technical intelligence teams. They were captivated by his experiences flying captured Allied aircraft. They uncovered his reports in German files and probed his assessments. "You concluded that American aircraft were superior not in performance but in operational design," an American officer remarked. Lerche nodded. "That was the most critical assessment. Your pilots were not necessarily better than ours. Your aircraft were not necessarily faster or more maneuverable, but you could keep more aircraft flying more consistently. You could train more pilots. You could sustain operations we could not." Was this evident when you flew the P-47? Immediately. Every design decision made sense once I understood the philosophy. You were not building for dogfighting supremacy. You were building for sustained operations. The comfortable cockpit meant pilots could endure 8-hour missions. The forgiving handling meant fewer accidents. The reliable engine meant less downtime for maintenance. The robust construction meant battle-damaged aircraft returned home. Did German leadership grasp this? Lerche laughed bitterly. My report was filed. The judgment was that I had been demoralized by flying enemy aircraft and lost objectivity. German engineering was superior. American engineering was crude. That was the official stance, and contrary evidence was rejected. If Germany had adopted American design philosophy, would it have mattered? Lerche considered carefully. By 1943, probably not. Germany's industrial base could not match American or Soviet output, regardless of design approach. But if we had prioritized operational reliability from the start, our fighters would have been more effective throughout the war. We lost many aircraft to accidents, mechanical failures, and maintenance issues that better design could have prevented. The interrogations revealed a pattern. Lerche was not the only German engineer who recognized Allied engineering strengths. Many had penned reports. Many had offered recommendations. All were ignored because the findings clashed with Nazi ideology of German superiority. The final production figures told the tale. The United States manufactured over 15,660 P-47 Thunderbolts during the war. At peak output, one Thunderbolt emerged from the assembly line every hour. Germany produced about 36,000 single-engine fighters across all types over the entire conflict, and German production was repeatedly hampered by bombing. More importantly, American aircraft achieved higher operational readiness rates. A unit with 100 P-47s might have 85 or 90 available for missions on any day. A German unit with 100 fighters might have 60 or 70 ready, the rest grounded for maintenance, parts, shortages, or fuel deficits. The multiplication was devastating. Greater production times, higher availability, times superior sustainability equaled overwhelming numerical dominance at the point of contact. In his later years, Lerche authored his memoir, Luftwaffe Test Pilot Flying Captured Allied Aircraft of World War II. The book delivered detailed accounts of his experiences flying everything from B-17 bombers to P-51 fighters. His P-47 evaluation included precise technical observations and his famous remark on the comfortable cockpit versus the cramped Bf-109. What makes Lerche's story significant is not just that he flew captured aircraft. Many pilots on both sides did that. It is that he comprehended what he observed. As a trained engineer and seasoned test pilot, he could assess not only if a plane was good or bad, but why it was designed that way and what it revealed about industrial philosophy. The P-47 Beetle that Lerche flew in November 1943 represented more than one captured fighter. It symbolized a wholly different approach to warfare. Germany approached World War II as if it was still World War I, where individual excellence and superior technology could win battle. America approached it as industrial war, where sustained operations and overwhelming numbers would win campaigns. German fighters were magnificent machines when functioning perfectly. The Bf-109 and Fly-190 were genuinely excellent aircraft, but functioning perfectly became increasingly rare. Manufacturing quality declined. Maintenance grew difficult. Parts became scarce, fuel unavailable. The P-47, by contrast, kept flying. It absorbed damage and returned home. It operated from rough fields. It could be maintained by mechanics of average skill. It could be flown safely by pilots with minimal training, and there were always more of them. Lerche recognized this instantly. His November 1943 report accurately foresaw what unfolded over the next 18 months, but it was filed and forgotten because the truth was inconvenient. If this deep exploration of engineering, philosophy, and design choices captivates you, delve further into World War II aviation history. History brims with moments where evident truths were dismissed because they contradicted comforting beliefs. Hans-Werner Lerche flew the P-47 Thunderbolt and immediately understood it represented a superior approach to fighter design. Not superior in performance, but in operations. His reward was to be overlooked and to witness his predictions materialize as the Luftwaffe was ground down by an adversary that could simply maintain more aircraft in the air more reliably. The lesson endures. In prolonged conflict, reliability triumphs over peak performance. Operational availability surpasses maximum capability, and design philosophy outweighs individual excellence. The P-47 was not the best fighter of World War II, but it might have been the best designed fighter because it was engineered not for air shows or test flights or record breaking. It was engineered for war, and in war, the side that can fight longest usually wins.